Welcome back to the IBFP. Here's your host, Boxing Nuke.
Welcome back, fight fans. Welcome back. Now, with Danny Jacobs coming off an electrifying win over Sergey Derevyanchenko, a very tough opponent, a guy who can really battle, a guy who's been undefeated, and a guy who's basically regarded as one of the strongest fighters at the middleweight division, and who's coming into this fight with Danny Jacobs knowing a lot about him, knowing a lot of his styles, tendencies, and habits. Danny Jacobs goes into that fight, dispatches Sergey Derevyanchenko, and damn near knocks him out in the first round, drops him in the first round, attempts to finish him, couldn't, and the fight goes 12 rounds. Danny Jacobs wins that fight. In my opinion, he did very well. The fight were close at some points, but I still thought that Danny Jacobs did more than enough to win by multiple rounds, in my opinion. If you saw the fight closer, because there were a lot of swing rounds, I definitely understand that. So that leads me to this. Ever since Danny Jacobs fought Sergey Derevyanchenko, dispatched him, and this is a top-level fighter, a guy with a lot of experience, a European style, a style that's always been an issue for Danny Jacobs, and he proved that he could beat a hard-hitting opponent, a guy who knows him very well, knows his tendencies, a guy who sparred over 300 rounds with him, and a guy who's also trained with his same trainer, Andre Rozier. A lot of people have been coming out saying, oh, I know Jermall Charlo would beat Danny Jacobs now. I see all these flaws in Danny Jacobs and all this bullshit. You know, all that's easy to say, but when has Jermall Charlo ever fought anyone on his record as dangerous, as powerful, or as good as a Sergey Derevyanchenko? He's never done it. So let's explore a potential matchup between Jermall Charlo and Danny Jacobs, and let's just cut through all the bias and bullshit. Now, before we dig into it, I just want to go over this. Danny Jacobs was asked a particular question about a Jermall Charlo, and he already stated that that's a fight he'd be interested in. As we all know, Danny Jacobs confronted Jermall Charlo outside of a fight, and basically backstage, and Jermall Charlo wanted no smoke with Danny Jacobs. It's already been made clear that Jermall Charlo does not want to fight Danny Jacobs. He's not interested in that fight right now. Maybe he's changed his mind since Danny Jacobs has become a world champion, but Danny Jacobs also headlines cards, something that Jermall Charlo has never done, and he actually won a coin toss with his brother to finally headline a card on December 22nd against Willie Monroe Jr. Let's dig into who Jermall Charlo is and how he matches up with Danny Jacobs. Jermall Charlo has 27 wins, no losses, 21 knockouts. So by his record standpoint, you'll say, wow, he has a great knockout percentage. He's a very powerful fighter. But let's look into the names of guys who he's defeated and see what type of fighter he really is, because your record tells you a lot. So the best name on Jermall Charlo's resume is going to be an Austin Trout, in who he fought in 2016, and he won that fight by unanimous decision, so he couldn't even stop a B-level fighter. And once again, I don't knock a guy if you're not able to stop a B-level fighter. That's fine. Some guys go in there to survive. Styles do make fights. So you know what, Jermall, I'll give you a pass on that. But it's just the guys, the fanboys are constantly hyping this guy like he's just unstoppable. He's so feared. And that's clearly not true. Austin Trout exposed a lot of flaws and holes in his game. Then he went on to fight a Julian J. Rock Williams, and he stopped him in the 5th round. Julian J. Rock Williams is a prospect. Jorge Sebastian Highland in the 4th round, a guy who was basically on one leg. And then he goes in and fights a Hugo Centeno Jr., in which he stops in the 2nd round, a guy who had already been stopped. Hugo Centeno Jr. had already been stopped when he fought Jermall Charlo. Just understand that. He had already been stopped in the fight by the time he fought Jermall Charlo. So what does that mean? This guy is a no-name fighter, a guy who's a prospect and who had already been stopped. Why are you fighting these guys? These are 3 guys that you're fighting in a row after fighting a B-level fighter who took you the distance, and you stopped them basically in showcase fights. You're not challenged for a title. You haven't done anything significant to separate yourself. You have not taken on any big names or any elite top-level fighters. And I'm not mad at Jermall Charlo. I like Jermall Charlo. I think Jermall Charlo has a lot of attributes that are good. He appears to have power. He has a decent jab, but he's not an elite level fighter. He's not a complete level fighter. And I also think that he's being so overhyped that's a detriment to him, because once he finally steps in there with the Sergey Derevyanchenko, a Triple G, a Canelo Alvarez, he will be stepping in against fighters who have fought at an elite and top level, a level in which he's never fought at, and a level in which he's never experienced. So he's not going to know what to do against these type of guys and these type of styles. You know, a lot of people predicted a lot of things between Canelo and Triple G, but it showed you one thing when these guys met. Whether you liked either guy or not, these guys were both elite level fighters, and they gave each other hell in those two fights. That's something that showed. Jermall Charlo has never fought an opponent that could give him hell, and a Danny Jacobs would give him more than he could handle. Looking at these two guys' style, I already know that Danny Jacobs could easily take him 12 rounds for a unanimous decision based on what Austin Trout did. And Austin Trout's not an elite level or an A-level fighter, but Danny Jacobs is. Danny Jacobs proved that he could stand in the pocket and he can bang with the best of them. He can go toe-to-toe with the monster, and he can also use lateral movement, his jab, and work from behind that. He also showed that he can switch from orthodox to southpaw as well. He can use that as well. Danny Jacobs has 35 wins, 2 losses, and 29 knockouts. He's been stopped once by Dimitri Pirog, and there was a lot of circumstances surrounding that, I'm sure we all know. And so Danny Jacobs has not been knocked out or knocked, basically hurt badly in any fight, especially recently since the Dimitri Pirog fight. And you also have to look at it like this. Yeah, he has taken a knockdown from Triple G, but some people see that as a push. It was a very close fight, but he was never visibly hurt in that fight. He was never visibly hurt in the Sergey Derevyanchenko fight. He's taken hard shots from top-level guys, and he's won these fights. A lot of people feel he beat Gennady Golovkin. A lot of people feel he put on a performance the same, if not better, than Canelo Alvarez's. And I look at a Danny Jacobs, and I see him and Canelo in a potential fight, and I say, man, that's a 50-50 fight, skill for skill. These guys are top-level fighters. And what a lot of people don't realize is that Danny Jacobs has a lot more tools in his tool bag than Triple G. All Triple G was bringing to the Canelo fight was essentially a big punch. And basically he did have a lot more movements defensively in the second fight than he did the first. But if you look at the totality of what a fighter is, Danny Jacobs has so many more facets that he can use against a Canelo Alvarez compared to Triple G. Canelo Alvarez also has many different boxing abilities. And so that would be a very close fight. That's a 50-50 fight between two elite and top-level fighters. And when you look at Danny Jacobs versus a Jermall Charlo, a guy who's already been drugged into deep waters, a guy who's already shown multiple flaws, he would not be able to handle, in my opinion, Danny Jacobs' power, size, and speed. And let's get into these guys in the size matchup here. Now, Danny Jacobs basically is 31 years old. He's 5'11 and a half, basically 6 feet. He has a 73-inch reach. But then on the other hand, Jermall Charlo is 28 years old, stands at 6 feet tall with a 73.5-inch reach. And so that'll be a very close fight on basically the physical attributes. These guys are both big men. They're very strong, and Danny Jacobs is probably one of the biggest middleweights there is. Danny Jacobs has no problem fighting at 168 if Canelo wanted to move up there. So that let me know that that's not an issue if Danny Jacobs fights a guy like Jermall Charlo. I feel like that would be a great fight, and I think that would tell us a lot about how talented and gifted Danny Jacobs really is. He's already proven he can go in there with guys that can hit and bang, and if you couldn't knock out an Austin Trout, and Danny Jacobs went in there toe-to-toe with Triple G, went in there toe-to-toe with Sergey Derevyanchenko, guys, in my opinion, who have elite level or better level power that's been proven compared to a Jermall Charlo based on the level of competition that they have faced, then I would definitely have to say that Danny Jacobs, in my opinion, at this point in time, based on the evidence that I've seen, beats Jermall Charlo, and not only beats him, possibly even stops him late in the fight. I just don't feel like Jermall Charlo is responsible enough defensively, and I also feel like Jermall Charlo does not work behind his jab correctly or adequately, and I've never seen Jermall Charlo in a situation where he's been having to adapt to a different fighter style, and against an elite level fighter, you will have to adapt. Once again, it's the IBFP. Please share, like, and you must absolutely subscribe.